Hey, Volume Manning here. Welcome to the Garden Report. We're back on the court. Good to have Sherrod Blakely back in the building for a 130-121 Celtics win that was closer on the scoreboard than it actually was the C's. I counted for the 17th time this season take a 10-point lead early. They get it up to as many as 26 right around the end of the third quarter. They looked like they were going to be able to sit their starters for the fourth, but the walk of shame happened, Sherrod, and they had to come in, and Brown hit an and one to close this one out. Jaylen Brown, the story of this one, 36, with Jayson Tatum sitting. He was curious how he was going to step into the front man shoes on this team, given his turnover issues and inconsistency at times this year, but he was the best version of himself in this one.
Yeah, and they need that from Jaylen. I think Jaylen is starting to understand that he needs to take a page from the Paul Pierce school of give the game what it needs. And I thought he did that. They needed him to be an efficient, impactful scorer. And, he had 30 points after basically 3 quarters of play and got, a few 6 more in the fourth quarter. But Jaylen was really good. And I thought not only was he really good, which we've seen him do that, but I thought the guys played well off of him, which I don't think has been the case in the past. And this team typically just absolutely melts down whenever they don't have Tatum. Since he's been a Celtic, they're 9-16 before the game against Washington when Tatum does not play. And so clearly, when you look at the success that they've had as a franchise when Tatum's been here, knowing when he's not around, it usually spells doom for these guys. But obviously, Jaylen and company were able to get it done for a win, as you pointed out, Bobby. It's a 9-point victory, but this was not a 9-point game at all. Much more decisive.
Only 2 turnovers from him in this one, so he was in control. At times he was running some pick and roll. Joe Mazzulla talked about how he's liked that part of his game so far early this year. But at times he's gotten erratic, and he even admitted last week we talked about him saying he's been lackadaisical with the ball in his hands at times. Defense isn't hurting him too much. He hasn't seen a lot of double teams. He's just making mistakes on the ball at times. But the last 3-4 games here, he's been much more focused, much more composed. And this has been a little bit of a debate on Twitter, but he's almost better positioned to play off a lot of the guards on this team. I know he has aspirations of playmaking. He talks about it a lot, how he can be that guy with the ball in his hands. But when he's letting Smart get the ball to him in the post, as he did at one point in this game, it's impossible to stop him when he's close to the basket. He's drawing free throws, or he's finishing with both hands in there.
He's a much better player off the ball than with the ball. And there are enough guys on his team where he doesn't have to play that role. And I think that's where Jaylen that's where his growth, I think, has to come going forward. Not so much getting better at a particular facet of play, but just understanding better what you need to do in a given moment. And I thought this was a good step in that direction. But him as an off-the-ball impact performer is, I think, a great role for him to be in, and one that I think the Celtics, the way they're constructed, they can make that happen relatively seamlessly. And Jaylen, he just needs to kind of get on board and be comfortable with that.
Yep, good bench effort from this one, so they maintain that without Tatum. Tatum is so important to start this year. He's obviously in the MVP conversation. But the fact that you can sit him down, it was a weird sight seeing him at the end of the bench with the sweatshirt and the pants and the hat on. You just never see that. He plays every game, every minute, and they finally got him to sit down. He's talked recently about how he doesn't like to sit out games. They finally convinced him. I think he turned his ankle in that Chicago game last week, played through it 2 games. He was great. Didn't look like it was bothering him at all, but they finally found a spot for him here. This is the first of 5 games in 7 days, I believe, for them to have him sit, and obviously some other guys will probably sit tomorrow against Charlotte. But they didn't miss a beat without him, which is super encouraging.
Yeah, well, this is why you have a deep bench, to use him. And Joe Mazzulla, he talked about that just pregame, about just opportunities for guys to step in and, fill voids that are left when guys are sidelined. And this is, again, the way that they were able to beat Washington, which is a solid team, with such ease, and their best player was doing what you and I were doing, watching the game.
Pretty close to us, too, in the corner.
Exactly. That says a lot about how talented this team is. This wasn't, some end of the, NBA standing squad that they just absolutely ran over. I mean, this team has a 7'3" big in Porzingis.
They're 10th in defense, Washington.
Right, a perennial all-star in Bradley Beal. This is not a bad team, and yet they look bad for a lot of this game. The Celtics are on a rhythm right now where they just don't seem capable of losing to anyone other than themselves. Like, if they're going to lose, they're going to beat themselves. They're going to not make shots, and they're not going to defend. That seems to be, to me, at this point, the blueprint for them to struggle. And if you're banking on that as an opponent, you're going to not get the Brinks truck to back up to you, because to me, you're just asking to go bankrupt if that's what you're banking on to happen with this team. Because pretty much every game, they're either knocking down shots or they're finding ways to defend at a better rate than they've done in the past. And if one or two of those things are working for them, they become incredibly difficult to beat, home or on the road.
That's a good reference. We're backing up the Brinks track to you with these offers, unbelievable ones we're still throwing at you. 40% off calm.com/garden when you go over there. That's calm.com/garden. Sleep sounds, meditation, and more. You won't find many podcast offers better than that one. For an app that millions of people use around the world, you've probably used it at times, I assume. Well, go check out what they have in full over there now. A huge library, constantly updated, of sleep sounds, meditation, more, and the calm of the day, which Joe Sway's a big fan of. One more question before we get you out of here. Is this the best offense ever? I mean, I was jumping into the numbers, and they're number one all-time in offensive rating. That's obviously an error thing. There's more possessions than ever and all that now. The top 10 teams are all from, the last 3 years. But this team, 40% from three through 20 games now. Every night they're showing up, it seems like they have 120. They're starting to do some historic stuff on that end.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking up at the scoreboard and you're near the end of the third quarter, and they're already cracking the 100-point barrier, which
110.
Yeah, which we've seen in past years. They would go games where they couldn't necessarily get that, or they barely get that in the fourth. They're very good, but I'm not going to put that best offense ever label on them because we only have a 20-game sample to work with, and there's a lot of things that unfortunately could go wrong between now and then. So I'm not quite there yet, but if they are statistically one of the best offenses ever, it's going to historically look very odd, because when you think about great offenses, you think about 2, 3, 4 different guys who can go out and get you 30, 35
Who was number one before this year?
Who's that?
Harden, Irving, and Durant 2 years ago in Brooklyn.
Well, exactly. That's my point. You're talking about 3 first-ballot Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
On this Celtics team, you've got maybe Tatum and a couple others who maybe will get in at some point. But the bottom line is they're explosive offensively. Teams are having a lot of trouble matching up. And as we talked about off camera, I think what the Celtics are doing is they're evolving as the season goes along before teams can figure out how to deal with them, so that by the time teams have an idea of what they want to do to limit them, they're already on to the next one. And that to me, that's a recipe for Banner 18.
Well, can they get even better? We'll talk about that in our next video here on Celtics All Access. Subscribe over there if you haven't already, as well as CLNS Media for all the reaction to the win tonight, 130 to 121 over the Wizards. We'll be back here tomorrow night. It's the courtside for Celtics Hornets on a back-to-back. We'll see who's available for that. And, of course, we're brought to you by Athletic Greens as well. athleticgreens.com/garden. Get you 5 free travel packs, as well as a year's supply of vitamin D. For Sherrod Blakely, I'm Bobby Manning here from TD Garden. This has been the Garden Report.